Professor Black. Law. He's published in over 5 dozen law review articles. He's written 3 books, his latest of which, The Beginner's Guide to the Constitution, was a top 5 seller on Amazon. And he's appeared on Fox, MSNBC, NBC, CBS, and the BBC.
This is impressive.
So anyway, with all that in mind, join me in welcoming Professor Blackman.
Thank you. It is such a pleasure to be back here in Chicago. I last spoke here over Zoom, which was not the same as I see you all in person. So I have a treat for you today. You get not one constitutional right, you get 2 constitutional rights. The First Amendment, the Second Amendment, and 3D printed guns. This is a topic that I've been litigating, and I'm very happy to talk about. Has anyone ever used a 3D printer before? That is great. What have you guys made? Anything? Just right here. Yeah.
Mechanical pieces.
Mechanical pieces? What else? Back.
Model castle for a nephew.
A model castle. That's creative. What else?
I made wheels for a CO2 powered dragster.
A CO2 what?
I made the wheels for a CO2 powered dragster car.
That's pretty cool. I have a little replica of the U.S. Supreme Court to scale on my desk, which is kind of cool. So you can use like tower over the court. Right. So for those of you who don't know, 3D printing is a technology that lets you design an object in 3 dimensions on a computer, whether it's a car or a house or anything. And once you tell the computer the dimensions of the item you're looking to create, it can use a process called additive machining to layer one on top of another to create an object. Coding in 3D printing can range from very difficult to very complicated. We'll use a simple example, right? Here's a little bit of code which you can look at. So if I tell you to make a sphere with a radius of 10 inches, the computer will know what to do with that. If I say make a cylinder with a height of 20 and a radius of 5, a computer knows what to do with that. This is very simple code that can be translated by a computer into a real-life object. 3D printing creates some trinkets, things of different colors and consistencies. this is what a 3D printer looks like. They're making actually a race car to make it out. And you can make even models of anatomy of the human brain. Now, the actual process of 3D printing is very straightforward. Have you ever made a candle before? Right? How do you make a candle, right? You take the wick, you dip in the wax, you pull it out. You dip in the wax, pull it out. You keep dipping it in the wax, and each time you dip it, it gets a little bit thicker around the base. You might use different colored waxes, you might use different types of waxes to make different designs. 3D printing works in much the same fashion. Instead of dipping, you are spraying. Right? So there's a little nozzle at the end, and it puts on a very thin layer of plastic. One layer of plastic on top of another, on top of another. And it moves around back and forth so you're spraying at the right position. You can also use, from a different perspective, a heated bed to make sure that the plastic stays nice and warm as you're printing. Okay? So I'll show you now a demonstration, I don't have the equipment here, of printing an object. And I want you all to see how quickly can you determine what's being printed. I'll see how quickly Chicago gets it, right? I can compare it to other schools. Right, so the first layer is this sort of honeycomb hexagonal matrix, which is a very strong way of building support, right, with these hexagonal designs. So you have layer 1, layer 2, layer 3. Starting to see what's going on. Anyone yet? Okay. Layer 4. Anyone see it? Layer 5. See it? All right, let's try another one. 6. One more. 7. Anyone see it yet? Frog, close, you're on the right track. Who?
Java?
Really close. That's it, who got it? In the back, here it is. Yoda. Very good. I've had people get it with this one. So you guys are one behind the curve, right? 7, 8, 9, 10. There it is. 11. That one sees it. 12. 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and there it is, done, right? So you can use this technology in a few minutes to print a replica of Yoda, or really anything else you want. Now, I don't have any artistic skill. I could not make this design out of clay. I could not make this design out of stone or any of the ceramic, but I can use a computer. And I can use my creativity to create different designs, like a Yoda or something else. Okay. Now, you did not all invite me here to talk about printing Yoda and other sort of Star Wars related toys. You invited me to talk about something a little bit more interesting, which is printing guns. Okay. Now, full disclosure, for the past, almost 9 years, I've been litigating in various courts the issue of 3D printing guns. Not the actual printing of the guns, but whether the government can restrict the sharing of the code, the information used to print the guns. And I've been involved in litigation against the State Department, against California, against New Jersey, and a host of other states have tried to take us to court. All right. This entire litigation began in 2012, a decade ago, with the Liberator. Cody Wilson was a law student at UT Austin. He was also a bit of an anarchist. And instead of going to class and studying, he decided to build a 3D printing gun during his first year of law school. He built lots of things. And he built this. Now, Joshua, what is this? This is the design of the Liberator, the barrel, right? The barrel is a part of the gun the bullet goes through. And Cody was able to design on a computer the very first fully functional 3D printing gun. He also developed various gun parts that can be 3D printed. This is what's called a receiver. This is the lower part of a gun that basically holds the guns together. Now, fun fact, if you just print one of these receivers, at least under current law, you have not violated the law. Right? If you buy one of these, you must go through a background check and have it registered with a serial number, but the law says you can print these yourself. Cody also developed ways to 3D print magazines. These are what hold the bullets in a gun. But what put him on the map is this. I said, Josh, what on earth is that? This is what's called a liberator, the full pistol. Okay? This blue thing, that's the handle. This white thing is the receiver. These little squiggly curvy thingies, those are the springs that you pull back to fire the gun. The only metal in this entire device are two. Number one, the bullet, okay, that metal. And number two, the nail. Why a nail? It's what's called a firing pin. Basically, you strike the pin against the back of the bullet, which creates the charge, goes boom, right? And then the bullet goes flying out. So the gun is fully functional plastic. Now the challenge with this is that plastic is not a very good material for making a gun. Why? Well, think about plastic. What happens when plastic gets hot? It melts, right? You ever put a piece of plastic on the stove, it melts in 2 seconds. What happens when plastic gets cold? It cools off. It's brittle, it cracks. Think what happens with a gun. You pull the trigger, it gets really hot and gets really cold in a short period of time. So when you put it all together, it sort of looks like this. Well, you notice there's a rope on the floor nearby. Now, why might there be a rope on the floor near the gun? Someone's laughing.
You don't want to be right there when you pull the trigger.
It's for testing purposes, right? So when this was being tested, you would put a rope on the trigger and stand very, very far away so you don't lose your fingers, right? Because again, when you make plastic hot, it melts, and when you make plastic cool off, it cracks. So these guns at first were not very useful. Cody had to develop a very elaborate process of treating the plastic with this acetone bath to make it strong enough, hard enough to withstand the combustion of the bullet. And eventually, after many test rounds and no lost fingers that I'm aware of, the gun was marketed. And by marketed, I mean was put on the internet. This was at the end of 2012. And this thing went absolutely viral. It was downloaded thousands and thousands of times. Now, a lot of people download the files, very few ever printed it. It takes about 40 hours of work to print out one of these guns. And equipment that costs tens of thousands of dollars. And let me tell you, even a decade later, it hasn't gotten much faster. It still takes a very long time, one layer at a time, to treat the plastic, to design it. There's a lot of work that goes into it. So if you actually want to have a gun, it's much easier to just buy one in the corner. Or in Chicago, I'm sure there's a corner somewhere you can buy one, right? Maybe you can tell me where. But you just buy a gun. This is not a very effective way of making a gun. It makes people afraid, which I'll talk about later, but this is not an efficient way of making fire. So you might ask, is this a problem, right, with the law? Can you have a 3D printed gun? Now, for most people, when I think of 3D printed gun, this is what comes to mind. Oh, you just boop, right, and a gun pops out of the printer. That's not how things work. Indeed, it is very easy to make a gun. A heck of a lot easier than using this. So I always hesitate before I ask, does anyone know what a zip gun is? No one in this room? Okay. Yeah, there's one guy, yeah. What's a zip gun?
Be several different types of things. It's functionally constructed of metal, very simple, tube firing pin type.
Yeah, very good. Thank you so much. Right. A zip gun is a homemade weapon that can be assembled with parts you find around the house. So this is one of my favorite designs I've done. This is a fully functional gun made out of a garden hose and a soldering iron. So you take the nozzle of a garden hose, and you take the base of a soldering iron, and you just weld it together. Fully functional gun. And by the way, this is a heck of a lot better than a gun made out of plastic, because it actually works. Right? It won't blow up in your hand. Right? The garden hose is strong, it's meant to hold a lot of heat, it's a very good design. Okay? I also found this design on the internet as well. This is a keychain flashlight. You see these, right? People have little flashlights in their keychains. You hollow it out, you remove all the innards, and you can put the mechanics in to make a firearm, fully functional. And you use little bitty bullets, and you kind of just like, jam in the back of the flashlight, and it goes boom. So I show you this not to give you ideas, although maybe your Chicagoans will just go and do it. But I show you this to say making a gun is very easy. And using a 3D printer is perhaps the least effective way of making a gun. Now let me show you a video, or at least a demonstration. Do not try this at home, please. These guys are morons, okay? They are going to make a rifle out of a metal pipe and a rubber tube with a single shotgun shell. And you know this is legit because they have a flip phone, they're recording it, right? This is serious business here. You got the flip phone out, okay? So what are they gonna do? You have a metal pipe. At the end of this metal pipe is this little dimple, right? A little thing that sticks out. This will be used for the firing pin. This will make the gun go boom. All right? So they load the red shotgun shell into this rubber tube. And by the way, this rubber tube is actually a very good material for a gun. Rubber can withstand heat and withstand cold. It's actually a very good material. Think of cars on your tires, right? It's a good material. So you load in the shotgun shell, and then they got their firing range. So why, I like kids. What's wrong with this picture, right? Just shut up. What's wrong with this picture? What's wrong with the picture? Where are they firing? Well, first off, they're indoors, right? You should never shoot a weapon ever, really, but definitely don't shoot it indoors. You never shoot it indoors. But even worse, does anyone see what's above the box, kind of like over here? In the next picture, it's a little more clear. Plugged into a fan that's right there. And you can see there's like 4 or 5 bullet holes in the, like an Amazon box, right? There's 4 or 5 bullet holes in the box already, so they've done this before. So they've practiced these, which is good. This is not winging it. All right, so here's what they're gonna do. They're gonna jam, who's holding, right? He loads the metal piece up, and he's gonna jam it into the back of the bullet. You see that? Ready? 1, 2, boom. My boom didn't go. Boom. Kill suspense, kills it, right? Explosion, right? They made a fully functional rifle with a metal pipe and a rubber tube, which cost maybe $5 in the hardware store. That's it. And they take it out. It's smoking. They didn't die, so it's 10 fingers. A fully functional weapon. Okay? So it's actually very easy to make a gun. Again, using a 3D printer is perhaps the least efficient way of making a gun. It takes so much time and effort for a very crappy product that might work once. Right. So is there a problem? Right? Again, is it illegal to do what they just did? Well, it's probably illegal to fire a handgun inside your home. Most jurisdictions, that's against the law. But under the law, you can generally make your own firearm. I say generally because this is actually an issue in flux right now. Historically, the ATF was of the mind that you can make a gun by yourself, with exceptions. You cannot make a machine gun. You cannot have what's called a short-barreled shotgun, which is a very specific number of inches. It's kind of an arcane definition. But generally, you can make your own gun. This is somewhat in flux now because the Biden administration is pushing forward new rules governing manufacturing of your own weapons. But much to my surprise, perhaps pleasant surprise, they didn't go after 3D printing guns. Instead, they went after these various kits you can use to assemble guns. But if you're just printing the parts yourself, it's not covered. So I was surprised. Instead, the way the federal government and the state government's gone after this technology is at the information side. They've not actually tried to ban the printing of the guns. Well, some have, but that's more recent. The primary strategy has been restricting the flow of information. So what happens? In 2013, the State Department sent a letter to Cody Wilson, the State Department, and they said, you're posting these files on the internet, you are in violation of arms control law. Huh? By putting files on the internet, you're violating federal arms control law. It's as if he was sending the guns to foreign countries, putting information on the internet was the same thing. And because non-US citizens had access to this information, take it down. All right? So Cody actually did take the files down, right? He actually complied with the law. But he then hired me and a few others to be his attorneys to actually sue the federal government. And we raised arguments under the First and Second Amendments. With other administrative arguments which you don't care about, I know, but we'll talk about the good stuff, First and Second Amendment. As a general matter, the First Amendment says you cannot impose content-based restrictions on speech. And this was very much, in our view, a restriction on speech because of what it represented. These files are expressive, they're designed, they're files that convey information, and they're only targeting one type of speech. Okay? People say, of course, Josh, but this speech is dangerous. You can use this speech to, make illegal guns. There's some history, right? With the Anarchist Cookbook, which I guess people in Chicago know a lot about, the Weather Underground route. No, do we talk about that anymore? The courts have long said that the mere fact that speech, might be connected to criminal activity is not enough. There has to be some closer connection that facilitate the crime. Okay? And indeed, information is speech. Right? The fact that you use zeros and ones doesn't deny you the right to have First Amendment protections. And this is actually very relevant now with GPT and chatbots. I mean, if you guys follow this, I wrote about this years ago. If you have purely artificial intelligence with no human interaction, is that free speech? Is that protected? Right? At least with the code we're using, there's actually a lot of human intervention between the code and the 3D printed gun. With like ChatGPT, just boop, 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 and spits out an answer, right? It's term paper. But at least the court held a decade ago that the creation and dissemination of information are speech. What about the Second Amendment? Well, we haven't argued this issue post-Bruin, which was the big Second Amendment case last year. We haven't had a chance to brief it yet. But our argument has long been that the Second Amendment includes not just the right to keep and bear arms, right? But also the rights necessary to keep and bear arms, which include both the right to make and acquire firearms. Right? If the Second Amendment was only about, this is Dick Heller, by the way, if the Second Amendment was only about the right to have a gun, that eliminates the antecedent question of where do you get the gun from, right? What comes before? We've argued the right to acquire the arms and the right to bear the arms. This argument, I think, gained some strength for the Bruin case, which was just decided last year, because the court had a very historically focused, like this one, right? Oh yeah, Chicago, you guys lost. Not you, but Chicago lost. But Bruin had a very historically focused analysis on the Second Amendment. And there really isn't any sort of historical tradition of banning the making of firearms in this capacity. So I think we're actually in stronger grounds post-Bruin, both with regard to right to acquire arms, right? I like this picture. He shackled his gun. Dick Heller was an interesting guy. He was actually a private security officer who worked for the courts. His day job was to guard federal judges. He had a gun during the day, but he went home at night, he couldn't have his gun. So he was actually very protective, but he was kind of kooky. But also right to, this one he actually got permanent, but also right to make arms. And there's a very deeply rooted history of people making their muskets, making their revolutionary era weapons, making their own ammunition. So I think post-Bruin we're actually on much stronger ground than we were before, but we haven't been able to litigate that issue yet. There's also the issue of the hybrid right, which I think post-Fulton kind of is dead. but there has historically been this notion that when you have two rights that reinforce each other, it's stronger. So we're actually having a restriction on the right to speak about how to make guns. So the First and Second Amendments sort of work together. Okay. All right, so what laws exist on the books now? There is the Undetectable Firearms Act, which was enacted in 1988, before you were all born, I think. But this law has been in the books for almost 40 years. The law says that any gun must have a certain quantity of metal. And the origin of this law is actually the Glock handgun, which is an Austrian handgun that became very popular in the 80s and the 90s. It was very lightweight and made of a composite polymer. Right? Now it has metal, and people said, oh my god, these plastic guns, we have to stop them, so they passed this law. It was memorialized in the Bruce Willis movie, Die Hard. Everyone see Die Hard, right? Oh, it's sad Bruce Willis, what happened to him. Kind of just faded out. It's very sad, but these were good movies back in the day. But Bruce Willis had this line, it said, luggage, that punk pulled the Glock 7 on me. You know what that is? The porcelain gun made in Germany. It doesn't show up in the airport x-ray machines, and it costs more than what you make in a month. Everything he says false, right? There is no Glock 7. It's not made of porcelain, it's made of metal. It's made in Austria, not Germany, close enough, I guess, right? It will show up in an airport x-ray machine, and they're actually pretty affordable. But, you know, when Bruce Willis makes a movie, you have to ban it, right? So that's what government does. So since the 3D printed guns have sort of hit the market, there have been efforts to try to restrict them. Chuck Schumer tried to ban them, he tries to ban everything. He does everything. Remember Ford Loco? He tried to ban everything. Right? Remember, it's easy. There's a list in recent magazine, things Chuck Schumer's tried to ban. It's a very long list. But that federal legislation did not go anywhere. Another proposal is to ban the metals. Maybe we should restrict the 3D printed plastic, which is nonsense, because you know what? You can 3D print metal. Yeah. This was a workshop in Austin. They printed an entire metal handgun with a 3D printed gun. So you can 3D print any material. But the approach that's gained the most traction is export control law. Anyone have experience with ITAR? Anyone? It stands for the International Traffic in Arms Regulation, ITAR. Was that? Yeah. This was very popular during the Cold War. You can imagine that the US government doesn't want to send foreign weapons to another country. We're doing this all the time with Ukraine, right? But at least historically, we didn't do that. So if you make, sophisticated processing chips, you can't send those to China, for example, right? The restrictions. If you make different systems for nuclear technology, you can't ship those to Iran, right? There's good reasons to have this law in place. But what's been very controversial over the years is how far does this law sweep? So one example is cryptography. The government has argued at times that cryptographic algorithms are controlled by ITAR, and that's illegal to ship cryptographic algorithms to other countries. So imagine you have a book. Imagine the book has, I know it's dated, a CD-ROM in it, a disk with information and cryptographic algorithms. The government said you cannot ship a book overseas. But it gets even worse. If there are any any non-US citizens in a room, you cannot even talk about these algorithms. That's an export, right? So they've actually enforced this thing at conferences, which is very stringent. At least historically, civil libertarians said we can't have this, we can't let the government use export control laws to restrict speech. This was actually a very widely accepted position, at least until my guy, right? Cody, right? Because people don't like guns. They like everything else, they don't like guns. And in 2013, the State Department sent a letter demanding that Cody take down these files. Yeah, the Liberator pistol. If you see the Dirty Diane, that's named after Dianne Feinstein. Yeah. He has a sense of humor. It's number 7 on the list. It's a silencer. I'll let you figure it out. Go check Cody Wilson's YouTube, Defense Tribune. He's Google him, or maybe don't Google him, but he's, having a client, this professionalism, but you have to deal with your client as you take him, and he's a fascinating guy. And it's always the people who try to push the boundaries who are trying to defend constitutional rights. Boring people don't do this sort of thing, right? People who actually set landmark precedents are those who push and challenge conventional wisdom. Anyway, the letter said, these files should be removed immediately, all right? And since Professor Henderson's not here, I'll talk a little bit longer. I got more time? Okay, I'll fill Todd's time. I don't dress like Todd, unfortunately, so I can't give you the full Henderson treatment. But we first brought this litigation in 2013. Initially, we sued the State Department, and we argued there's violations of the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, and also the Administrative Procedure Act, and some other due process claims that aren't very, salient. The litigation went on for years. The district court denied the injunction. The Fifth Circuit affirmed. We drew a very bad panel in the Fifth Circuit, and we missed en banc by a couple votes. This was back in 2015. We didn't have the new judges yet. Case went to the Supreme Court. The court denied certiorari. So we went back down to the district court, and the district court sent out, its usual notice: can you engage in settlement talk? And by that point, the administration switched. And it was now the Trump administration was in charge. And much to our pleasant surprise, they decided to settle the case with us. Okay, good. So we worked out a deal. The government would give us the license we were looking to have to share this information. And they said we will no longer enforce ITAR, the system of regulations against speech in the public domain. So we're like, oh my God, that's great. So then we publicized the settlement shortly before it went into effect, which was a mistake. Because after we publicized the settlement before it went into effect, we were sued across the country. So first off, the gun control group sued us, and they argued the district court to block the settlement. Why? Because the settlement did not comply with the Administrative Procedure Act, and then it was just bad. Right? They tried to block our settlement, and there's really no standing to even do that. So this was number one case where it's argued in federal court in Austin to allow our settlement to be go into effect. And we had a hearing, I had like 24 hours notice, we got sued for a TRO. We won. Good job, Josh, right? So the first TRO, I actually prevailed on. I argued this case, so we prevailed. That night, as soon as we got our license, we put all the files online. We didn't actually tell anyone we did this. We did it very quietly, but the files were downloaded by the thousands. Okay. Then we realized, okay, this is gonna be bad. We're going to get sued by other people. So we actually went on offense. So they spent that entire weekend drafting a complaint. And we were going to sue all these states that were trying to harass us. We tried to sue them in Texas because they came to our jurisdiction. And we were going to file that complaint Sunday afternoon. About an hour before we filed, I get an email from the Pennsylvania AG saying, we are going to sue you and seek a TRO immediately. They sued us on a Sunday afternoon in federal court in Philadelphia before we filed against them. And the judge, I'm not kidding you, scheduled a hearing for 2 hours later on a Sunday afternoon. We had zero time, no time at all to prep. And actually, I did, I'm totally serious, I did the oral argument at the United Lounge at LaGuardia Airport, right? Because I was at the airport, that's where we did it. So the judge says, go on the phone, you get on the damn phone. And told the judge, like, look, judge, the files they're challenging are already on the internet. You can't have a TRO because the status quo is the files are available. And the lawyer from Philadelphia didn't even know this, right? He had no idea the files were online already. So I told the judge, like, Judge, look, I'll tell you what we'll do, all right? What if we restrict the IP addresses so only people from Philadelphia and Pennsylvania can access the files? Can you deny the TRO on those grounds? I just made this up on the fly. I was like, maybe we'll figure it out, right? I figured, this has never been done before, right? Cody said, that's like North Korea level technology, right? To limit access to the file in certain geographic regions. Like, no one does that, but we figured it out. So I said, Judge, if I get my client to restrict the files to Pennsylvania IPs can't be allowed, would you deny the TRO? He's like, okay, fine. So he denied it. I got on my flight, made it up by 5 minutes, right? But we weren't done. That was a Sunday. The next day was Monday. We were sued that morning by New Jersey Attorney General. And where did he sue us? Not in federal district court, in Chancery Court. He sued us in Essex County, Newark, New Jersey Chancery Court. And I swear to you, he sought a nationwide injunction in Chancery Court. And again, I had to file a brief overnight with basically no notice. I had never filed in New Jersey. They do fax machines, by the way, in Chancery Court. So they can't electronically, I had to find a fax machine. So I filed a brief overnight saying this is really bad. And I had to argue this one again over the phone because I couldn't be in 8 places at once. And I said, Your Honor, with respect, I don't think Chancery Court has jurisdiction to issue a nationwide injunction. And he said, I think you're right, sir. So again, I said, look, I'll tell you what, we will block New Jersey IP addresses. We'll let New Jersey out of it, right? And I actually called it the Great Blue Wall. I shouldn't have called it that, but that's what I called it, the Great Blue Wall. Basically walling off the blue states. As the judge denied the TRO and will block off New Jersey IP addresses. All right, fine. So he denies the TRO. But that wasn't done. Washington sued us, the state of Washington. And it was part of a 26-state coalition, might be off, I forgot how many states. All the blue states joined on, and DC. And they all sued us in federal district court in Washington. In fact, New Jersey sued us twice. You can't do that. They sued us in New Jersey and Washington for the exact same offense. You can't do that. That's just pick your form, right? Now this was the worst one. So I won the TRO in Austin. I prevailed on the TRO in Philadelphia District Court. Eastern District of Pennsylvania. I prevailed in the district court, the Chancery Court in Jersey, but I would not prevail in this last one. This was a 26-state coalition, and Washington sued not only us, but also the State Department, seeking an injunction to block a settlement. Now mind you, at that time, the files were online. They were being downloaded by the thousands, right? They were everywhere, okay? So again, I was arguing this one by phone. I wasn't there. I can't go from New Jersey to Washington in 2 hours. The laws of physics don't allow that to exist. And I'm arguing this case and making arguments about the Pentagon Papers case and Snyder v. Phelps, all these good First Amendment cases. And the judge asked me one question. Right? What's one question the judge asked me? Mr. Blackman, do you represent all the parties? I said yes. He wanted to know if his order would stick. He wanted to make sure that everyone who was being sued was being represented, so as there was no doubt. And to be candid, I don't know if I did. Like, there were a couple of parties I didn't even get a chance to talk to. This all happened in 72 hours. I had to argue 4 TROs in about 3 days. And at the end of the hearing, the judge announced from the bench, after no surprise, that he was going to rule in favor of Washington. And so I paused to say, Your Honor, if I can just clarify, are you issuing an order to my client to take down his files? He was like, no, I am not. I'm simply blocking the government from giving you the settlement. But as a consequence of blocking the settlement, we don't have license to publish the files. So I said, Your Honor, so just to be clear, do we have to take our files down? He said, well, that's not my order, right? Of course it is an indirect effect. Then he made a kind of a smart aleck comment. He said, well, your client's an anarchist. Let's see if he follows the law, right? And I said, Your Honor, that's not appropriate. My client's followed every court order. And then the judge said, well, he kind of just changed the topic, and then he ended the hearing. That was kind of obnoxious. Then at that point, the files are down, and I have to call the client and say, look, Cody, we lost. That's the client. You never want to have that phone call, right? That's the worst phone call to have. After this emotional weekend, I think I billed 80 hours in 3 or 4 days. I just was around the clock. And I said, Cody, you got to take the files down. And he's like, well, I can't. He had built so many firewalls and redundancies for hacks that it was almost impossible. So it would take him almost a few hours to actually dismantle all the layers of security built up to prevent people from hacking down his site. And a couple hours later, he said, all right, Josh, we are now down. And then that was it. So then my phone rings. And who is it? Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York. True, it's a true story. And Cuomo calls me and it's like, are you the guy representing the 3D printed gun guy? I'm like, yeah, that's me. He's like, you tell your client to take down those files. I'm like, you idiot. Your attorney general just sued me and got a nationwide injunction. Why are you calling me? And you know what he said? She doesn't work for me. Which is funnier in hindsight since the AG kind of knocked him out. He was like, she doesn't work for me. Because in New York, the AG is elected independently of the state governor. And then Cuomo was like, but he wanted credit for getting the victory. He thought he could just call me to intimidate me, to tell me that I'm like an idiot. I said, tell your lawyer to send me a letter, which of course there was no letter, it never came. And then the funniest part was that, I'm from New York, I know how this works. Like, you're from New York? I'm like, yeah. He's like, don't you miss New York? I said, no, I like Texas much better. He's like, come on, no, I don't miss New York. I said, my parents live there. He's like, oh, really? This is where it gets funny. He's like, your parents live there? He said, who are they going to vote for? Because the election had been coming up like, my parents are Democrats, and then so they'll vote for. Oh, that's very nice. And I'll never forget, it's July 31st. I said, my parents' anniversary is today. And he said, you know what, you tell your parents, Governor Cuomo said, happy anniversary. And after I called my parents, I told them the governor wished them happy anniversary. So that was 2018. This is a true story. I've written it up. It's true. I swear it's all true. This was 2018. The litigation got ugly after that. So we were litigating in the Ninth Circuit about whether there could be an injunction against the government. And eventually that case pettered out when Biden took over. It just went nowhere. We're litigating now in the Fifth Circuit about whether we can sue New Jersey. This is where it's just a mess. So we sued New Jersey in the Fifth Circuit. District Court said no personal jurisdiction. Fifth Circuit reversed saying yes, there is, because they came to us, they harassed us in Austin. Okay. But by that point, the District Court in Austin had already transferred the case to New Jersey. So that's where we are right now. The New Jersey District Court has the case. The Fifth Circuit said, return the case to Texas. You know what the judge in New Jersey said? No. So there's a request to transfer the case back to Texas, and the judge in New Jersey says no. We went back to the Fifth Circuit. Fifth Circuit said, begrudgingly, we have no jurisdiction to order another district court to return the case, but pretty please assure them to do it. Like, do the right thing. Judge in New Jersey said no. So that's where we are right now, right? It's in this morass. I've been on this case 9 years. We still don't have a ruling on the merits. We still have no ruling on the merits whether the First and Second Amendment protect the right to 3D printed guns. I've been on this for 9 years. I'm old. I have 2 kids now, right? This is like my entire life has been going on. I'm still on this case. But hopefully, maybe, one day, someday, some court of jurisdiction, hopefully in Texas, will rule on this matter and let us know what the First Amendment protects. All right. And now I've filled up Todd's time. Thank you so much, and happy to take some questions. Thank you so much.
Okay, yeah, so we'll begin Q&A. If you have questions, raise your hand, we'll get to you. Yeah.
You talked about the cryptography example as well as the 3D form example. I'm wondering if you think on cases like that, it's better to argue through the First or through the Second Amendment primarily.
Right. The question was with regard to cryptography as well as guns, is it better to argue first or second? You always led with First Amendment, right? The Second Amendment issue is trickier because it's not just the right to have the information, but to print them and manufacture, which creates different levels of complexity. But on cryptography, the government's argued that actually an algorithm is dangerous, right? In the wrong hands, a cryptographic algorithm can shield information from the government. Right? Even think of your iPhone, right? Your iPhone's encrypted. It's very hard for the feds to break that encryption. And the federal government restricts those sorts of algorithms to block their access to information. So we've always led with the First Amendment. But the Second Amendment scares the judges. They're just very scared of having these plastic guns. And we've had amicus briefs from groups, you know, not to make this trivial, but LARPing, right? Live action role playing. People actually 3D print weapons for cosplay and other causes, right? There's no mechanical stuff inside. But if you read the laws that New Jersey has enacted, it basically bans printing weapons for games, for theater, right? If something can be used for a weapon. If you read the New Jersey law carefully enough, it actually bans a common household nail, which be used in a gun. Like they've had these completely overbroad statutes, but the First Amendments are a primary vehicle. Thank you for the question. Yeah, George.
So I'm struggling to see what the advantages are of having or 3D printing a gun. Like, why would someone want to do it on a cost-benefit analysis?
There's none.
Okay.
It's mostly a principle, right? You're trying to assert the government does not have full control over firearms. That's why you do it. It scares people. It basically sends a signal. These are not effective guns. Even a decade later, plastic hasn't gotten that much stronger. These guns can be used a couple times to throw them out. They're not very effective. Now, what is useful, though, is not even 3D printing with plastic. It's creating the parts used for a mechanical gun, right? So you can have what's called a gun kit. You can buy these online in just about every state, which are the various parts of a gun. And maybe you just 3D print one part of the gun. For example, I put the picture up earlier, the receiver. Right? This is actually the most significant advent of 3D printing. If you just print this one part, this plastic receiver part, and surround it with metal, that does not need to go through a background check. That's actually much more salient than having an entirely 3D printed gun, which is mostly just for show.
And so, is it very inaccurate? I mean, the 3D gun?
Oh, you can't aim at all. In fact, let me just show you I don't know how much you know about guns, right? But the barrel of a gun has to have what's called rifling, right? What's rifling? There are these grooves. So when you fire a gun, think of like when you throw a football, you don't throw a straight, you throw a spiral on it, right? When there's a spiral, it sort of goes in a straight trajectory. when you have the barrel of a gun, there's actually these grooves which put a spin on the bullet, so it has a spiral to it, there's a curve. These 3D guns have no rifling. You're just shooting blank. It just goes wherever. There's no accuracy at all. That's why we put the rope on it as well.
Last question.
Yeah.
Is Mr. Wilson just a very wealthy guy who wants to win this on principle? I mean, he seems like a cool guy, but this is a 9 years.
Yeah, I mean, let me. I want to see if I have to address the violating
Oh, right, yes.
privilege.
Forgive me.
So, I mean, how do I put this? Impact litigation, right? You're all smart law students. You're all Chicago, right? You're all going to be engaged in important things, right? Sometimes litigation is meant for the purpose of litigation, not necessarily to win right away, right? We've been in court with New Jersey for 6, 7 years. We've been in court with the State Department for about 8 or 9 years. And in that time, they've not taken any enforcement action against them. I think I answered your question. Did I answer your question?
Yes, sir.
You're between the lines? Right, but again, with impact litigation, sometimes the litigation is the process, right? You're trying to assert your rights, but while the litigation's ongoing, you can sort of continue your business. And much to our surprise, the Biden ATF, the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, their new regs don't go after 3D printing. I thought they would, and they didn't. And maybe they'll worry about, again, our litigation could burn them, right? If they actually enforce this against it, it's much easier to get a judgment, right? The reason why we've been in court forever is that they've not actually enforced all our sort of pre-enforcement challenges against New Jersey, because they've not actually come after us. They just enact these laws and they make a press conference, they don't actually go against us. I think I answered your question. Okay. Carl?
Just to make sure, so you're saying 3D gun is essentially, it's like a musket with such a very short barrels, because there's no rifling, that's essentially how it is?
Yeah, it's very inaccurate, and it uses a very low caliber bullet. It's not very lethal. Yeah.
Is that because we don't have 3D technology fine enough yet to get the rifling in the barrel? Is there a point in the future where you might be worried about that? Or?
Yeah, the question's been here, will there be a point in the future where the rifling technology gets better? Possibly, and again, I've been on this for a decade, I always get this question. There's not much incentive to innovate with rifling because you can 3D print the receiver, the part I showed you a moment ago, and then use regular metal barrels, right? The only reason you'd want a plastic gun is to try to smuggle it in somewhere to form a crime, but anyone who's competent would just use a metal barrel because they're better, right? These are things designed to scare people, right? It makes people like say, oh my God, the anarchists are coming, right? But realistically, they're not very useful. And again, a bullet is made of metal, a trigger metal detector, right? It's very hard. I mean, I swear to you, the Washington Attorney General, right? Why do they even have standing, right? Why did the Washington AG have standing to sue us over this? They claim, I swear to you, that terrorists would come in the Canadian border from Canada to Washington with 3D printed plastic guns and create crime in their state. Because in Seattle, it's there's no crime in Seattle, right? But they actually were worried that terrorists would bring in plastic guns. Oh my God, Edith Jones. So there was a Fifth Circuit argument, and Judge Jones actually said to the Obama lawyer, aren't you worried about Mexican cartels bringing guns, the terrorists with plastic guns? And oh, the poor lawyer just exploded. It was just so bad. She's looking at Fast and Furious. She's like, aren't you worried about Mexican terrorists? Anyway, I'm done. All right, other question.
Yeah, we have time for about 2 more.
Okay. Yeah.
I was just curious about how your practical legal work informs your academic work. Because I feel like a lot of the professors, at least that I've had, either have never done practical work or certain areas.
At Chicago? No, never. It's a really good question, and it's unexpected. So the way I came to this case was actually backwards. In 2013 or 14, I wrote a law review article on 3D printed guns. At that point, I had never met Cody, I didn't know anything about him, but I did a symposium on the Second Amendment, it was Tennessee Law Review, and I wrote about how the First Amendment protects sharing this information. And I had some other discussion of how export control law worked. And then out of the blue, I got an email from Cody Wilson, and he said, I'm paraphrasing, I want to sue the government, can you be my lawyer? So he actually recruited me based on my scholarship. So my academic views were formed prior to this. I didn't mention this, but I had actually never argued in any court ever before these TROs. Our lead counsel dropped out when we got sued by the gun control groups. He said, I'm not going to do it. And I was the only guy left standing. So on basically 2 days' notice, again, I had never argued in any court of any jurisdiction. I argued a TRO in district court in Austin against these gun control groups, a former partner in a big law firm, because they bring in big guns, right? I won. So my first ever TRO, I prevailed. Good job, Josh, right? And I actually made an evidentiary objection. I was like, objection, Your Honor, evidence, facts on the record, sustained. It's like, oh my God, I got sustained. I've never made an objection since mock trial, right? Since my second law school. And then I argued in freaking New Jersey Chancery Court. Like, I don't even know chancellor, what I call the judge, right? And again, that's my second argument. And then the one in Seattle, I guess my fourth argument, was my first ever actually loss. So, I had 3 victories, I won 3 TROs, then the fourth judge enters a nationwide injunction against me, the other 3 don't matter. But to your question about advocacy, it's an important point. I always try and keep them separate, and I always try to make clear I'm speaking in my role as an advocate here. But for the most part, the litigation has been consistent with my scholarly views. I haven't seen much of a disconnect. It does happen sometimes where there's an argument that you would not make in a larger article that you would make in a brief. And I do think there are some differences. When you have a client and you have a duty of representation, you have to be a little bit more aggressive. But there have been times where I said, I can't put my name on this, and either you take my name off the brief or we take out the argument, and I prevailed on those occasions. But after, actually, I went to Beck Redden, our lead counsel now is at Beck Redden in Houston. I helped recruit him, right? So after our lead counsel dropped out, I was trying to find someone else to come in to help with Cody. But yeah, it sucked. Basically, in that weekend in July in 2018, it was basically me and one other guy, and we had to brief all these cases by ourselves against the entire legal resistance. They were coming at us, like, I had to file briefs, file motions for admission, all these like little technical ticky-tack things that are very important. I was doing all these arguments this was before Zoom, so all these arguments on the phone, you couldn't hear anything, you couldn't see anything. I was just sitting there in my office by myself, so it was very intimidating. I was scared of my mind, but it was a good experience. Thank you for the question. Yeah, back.
Thank you for your talk.
Thank you.
As someone who's going to be working on ITAR,
Oh, good.
yeah,
Where are you working?
at Kirkland.
Oh, good for you.
So I'm curious what your perspective on other areas or like low guidance between constitutional rights and things like ITAR and export control are considering the tightening that's going on with like China and everything, or if you foresee other areas of conflict down the road.
Yeah, no, and then let me sort of pivot back to the chat AI and the chatbot stuff. Some of this tech is very strong, right? And I think the government will try to restrict it because it can create huge interference in elections and other matters. So not just even national security stuff, but this technology I think will change how we think about speech in general. The ITAR is a tricky one. I don't want to go too far into the weeds, but back in the 70s and 80s, there were a series of opinions where OLC, the Office of Legal Counsel, said you cannot use ITAR against public domain tech. And I think that's a good rule, right? Cody stuff is all in the public domain. OpenAI, at least in theory, is public source technology, perhaps, right? So, in my view, it's in the public domain. It's fine. These are classified documents. The blueprints of a nuclear submarine. ITAR is good, right? I'm okay with that. I thought there was another question over there I wanted.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, if you prevail on the merits in this and you eventually get a ruling, what do you think the implications would be for other ways of manufacturing weapons possessions?
Again, until 3D printing becomes more profitable, I can't imagine much, right? It's still cheaper to buy a gun made with steel. But one area where this does matter is actually IP and counterfeit goods, right? This is actually lurking in the background. So imagine like I can 3D print a pair of Air Jordans for $5, and they look exactly the same as a pair of Jordans you buy in the store for $500. That will scare Nike. So actually, I've always thought that the fashion industry will come out against us. I didn't know when it's going to happen, but that's inevitable because counterfeiting goods at low prices is a serious impact on businesses, right? Because you can buy a fake handbag that's made in China, or you can 3D print it here domestically for a few dollars, and that's actually much more useful. You can 3D print leather, right? You can 3D print different materials. You can fake it. Anyway, that's what I think. All right, we done? You have more questions?
Yeah, if anyone has another, or we can. Yeah.
Yes, right there.
Given how, I guess, useless seeming these guns are,
Yeah.
why do you feel like you're so much better in the Bruin than under, the pre-Bruin approach?
The only reason why is there's no historical ban of making on firearms, right? We're not dealing with
intermediate scrutiny, or whatever the middle scrutiny might be, is there an interest? Is there a history of the government using this law to ban home manufacturing? The answer is no. Only recently the government tried to ban home manufacturing guns. That's the only reason I do it. Eventually we'll brief it. Eventually we'll get back to the Circuit. God willing, it'll happen eventually. We've been to the Fifth Circuit 4 times. We've been to New Orleans 4 times without a ruling on the merits. It's interminable. All right. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Chicago, and have a wonderful day.